So I got this DM from somebody saying, "Hey, I made a directory looking at the meta crisis, and I put you in my directory of looking at the meta crisis, and I want to know what you think of your profile in this directory about the meta crisis." And I was like, "This seems pretty cool. Maybe I want to record a little video introducing myself into the context of the meta crisis." So the meta crisis, as I understand it, seems worth naming it from my perspective because I have a perspective, and that's part of what I am conveying to you. And because it's the sort of thing that needs to be understood from all perspectives, which is sort of the whole thing that I'm on about in the first place. The meta crisis, from my perspective, is that we've got a crisis, and we've got many crises actually, and we have this meta crisis, which is that we don't know how to deal with crises. And the way that I think about this can be summarized with a simple sentence. The problem is we can't talk about it. And this applies on all scales. This is not just about the meta crisis. This applies to issues that you might be having with your spouse or your roommate or your coworkers, or even just like the guy at the the place that keeps doing the annoying thing or whatever. And with any of those situations, if you've got an issue with your roommate, say like some difference in how you guys like to maintain the state of the kitchen or something like that, you might have some conflict or some difference or whatever. But if you can talk about it to sort of full satisfaction, like if you can really get to the bottom of what's going on for each of you, you can usually find not just a compromise, but a win-win, like a sense of, oh, this is what makes sense for both of us. And if it's a really intractable thing, it might be that the answer actually is we shouldn't be roommates. This is not a good fit. We have a really strong difference in how we like to organize these spaces. But it might also be that you really like being together. And so in the context of being together, you're able to devise some sort of thing that sort of meets both of your needs and, feels good for both of you. And that the both of you can tell isn't compromising something important. And so, yeah, the problem is we can't talk about it. It's the fact that we can't talk about it that makes it a problematic problem, like that makes it have this kind of intractable, sticky, ugly, oppressive quality of problem. When we can talk about it, it becomes the exciting kind of problem, the kind of problem that feels like a puzzle, the kind of problem that feels like, if you're like learning some kind of mathematics that you like or something like that, and you're solving problems and you're like, yeah, this is really satisfying. Like that's how things feel when we can get into a flow of being able to talk about things together. So that's part one. Part two is, why can't we talk about things? What gets in the way of that? It seems to me that there are a few answers to this that maybe all boil down to one thing or something. But I'm going to try to summarize them as maybe thing number one, blame. Blame being the attempt to pin responsibility on one part of the system, which is illusory because it sort of screens off one part of the system from the rest of the system rather than seeing it as an interactive pattern. That's complex, and I don't yet know how to articulate the whole thing there. The second piece is judgment. When I say judgment, what I mean is speaking about the world in a way that asserts what is so, as if not from your own perspective. So if I say, that's bad, it might be clear from context that what I mean is it doesn't work, right? Like, that toaster's bad. It doesn't cook the toast properly, or it burns, or it has this particular issue. It is not a good toaster. It might also, or a simpler example, like, I take a sip of, I smell the milk container and I go, that's bad, right? And like what I mean is it's bad milk. Like it has spoiled, it has failed to be the thing that it's supposed to be. And so in that context, it's sort of implied. Sometimes also what I mean is it's bad for me. I don't like it. It doesn't suit me. It is not a fit. I can tell that something about it is not a fit for me. However, there's a phenomenon that occurs that
where we push that outside of ourselves and say, not only is this not a fit for me, it's bad in some more general sense, and you should be in allegiance with me about the badness. And if not, if you don't get in this allegiance, then you're bad. And this is dualism, by another name. What we don't realize is that we do this not just with so-called value judgments of good and bad, but even just with trying to speak to what is so. When we speak to what is so, we are in some sense always speaking to how things seem to us, but we often speak it in a way that implies that that it is so for everybody. And when we do that, we can't get common ground because we've negated our own perspective from the truth of what we're saying. And so insofar as the truth looks different from a different perspective, there's no way to dovetail that with it. I mean, there is, like, you can go and put the thing back in the person's perspective as a listener, but it's harder. It involves a lot more work. It can be a lot more emotionally difficult, and so forth. So yeah, and that is, for lack of a better word, the thing I'm calling judgment. And judgment often arises out of a form of distrust, which connects with this bad thing. I have so many more things to say about this, but I'm trying to kind of keep it to this edge essence that gets back to the meta crisis. So the problem is we can't talk about it. Why can't we talk about it? We can't talk about it because we are failing to properly fully inhabit our own first-person perspectives when we try to talk about it. And that has this result of making it so that we can't do the thing that conversation is, which is bringing perspectives into contact with each other and emerging a deeper perspective. And an analogy that I love to use for this is with my eyes. So if I hold my finger up like this, right now, my finger is on the right side of the camera. Right now, my finger is on the left side of the camera. Which of those is correct? It's a wrong question. They're both correct, but they are only correct from that perspective. From your perspective, there isn't even a finger on the side of the camera because you're not seeing a camera. You're seeing my face. And you're seeing it through one lens. And so you don't have, you're not having a depth perception. I'm flat to you right now. And your eyes are seeing slightly different things, but not in any kind of parallax sort of way. And that's your perspective, and I can say that about your perspective in this context, assuming you're watching this video and not just listening to it. If you're listening to it, of course, you're not seeing my face at all. And so when we speak in this way that I'm calling judgment, and when I say I'm calling judgment, that's partially me attempting to step back from, I'm not sure that this is how other people would use the word judgment. So I'm trying to create space for that and saying, from my perspective, this is a useful way to use the term judgment. This is an example of the thing. Now, obviously, it can be really costly to be constantly trying to unpack, oh yeah, well, I mean, that's true from my perspective, but it might not be true for all perspectives. You don't want to have to do that all the time, but you need to be able to always do it when necessary. You need to notice when you're getting blocked on some fight over what reality is, and take a step back and say, okay, look, clearly it looks different to each of us. So here, let me describe how it looks to me. And then the other person can describe how it looks to them. And then you can actually do this depth perception thing where you synthesize the two views into a deeper view. But that involves a kind of sitting deeply with the unknown. And I guess that's maybe the third piece. It's kind of part of the judgment piece. But yeah, sitting deeply with the unknown. We don't know what's going on. If we knew what was going on, we would have a quality of agent arena relationship or something with it that would afford us doing things about it. And then we would just have a bunch of crises. We would not have a meta crisis. But in some sense, we really don't know what's going on. And that's the situation. So, yeah. That's a short take on how my work is related to the meta crisis. I mean, I guess I haven't really said what my work is in this, but I am attempting to understand deeply the nature of what conversation is, what parallax is, what shared understanding is, and what it means to find depth perception together and build trust on really deep levels. I also run a software company that is about intentionality, and I'm interested in how people can work together and various other questions like that. But this first thing is kind of the essence of how my work relates to the meta crisis.